Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2011 Honda Pilot. Now the first thing I like to do is push the caliper piston back in by putting a little screwdriver in through this little opening here and wedging it between the front edge of the pad and this body of the caliper and prying that caliper piston back in to make room for the new pad material. But before you do that, I like to take a look at the master cylinder and take a look at the fluid level. Make sure that it's not too full, that it's going to spill when you push the fluid backwards through the system. Now the other thing, you could also just take off this little rubber cap and crack open your bleeder screw and push the old fluid out through this rather than back up through your system. And that's fine too. If your fluid is old or dirty, it's a good idea to do that rather than pushing it back through the system. Alright, so here's our master cylinder right here, and this one's really dirty on the side, so it's hard to see inside. So I'm going to just pull the lid off, and looks like our fluid is well below the max line. We've got some room in there. If we push the fluid backwards through the system, it's not going to overflow and make a big mess. If someone had been topping this off as the brake pads wear down, if you keep adding fluid here, when you do finally push the caliper pistons back in, it will overflow. We've got enough room in there this time though to push the fluid backwards through the system without having to remove any of it. If it was full, you can take some of it out with a turkey baster or with a rolled up little paper towel or something clean that you can put in there and wick some of the fluid up and out. Okay, now that we know we have enough room in the master cylinder to push this caliper piston back in, I just like to grab a standard flathead screwdriver and put it in through this little opening. Try to wedge it in front of the brake pad here, and then we just pull that towards us. And it's fairly simple. Now you still may need to push the caliper pistons back in with the caliper compression tool. This will push it most of the way in usually. Now sometimes I'll shift that in between the pad and the rotor. In this case I'm not really worried about prying on the rotor because we're replacing it. If you pry that towards you, careful not to break your screwdriver, I guess. Just some solid steady pressure, and then you'll see now we've got those pistons back in. We've got a lot more movement there and a lot more space in there for the new pad material. Now we can loosen and remove these two slide pin bolts, and that's a 17 millimeter. And this is just to make things go a little quicker. And that's what those guys look like. We'll set those aside. Now look at this, I finally got some of these hooks to hold up the caliper. I used to just use a little rope with some bungees on it, but you can use just about anything. So I'm going to pull off the caliper and hook it on up here, out of the way. So we just got that hooked up on the coil spring up above, like so. Alright, now we can pull out the old pads and pull off these little V springs. Alright, then we need to loosen and remove these larger caliper bracket bolts. Those are 19 millimeter. And I'm going to try out my new Milwaukee 3/8 impact and see if that'll take them off. There we go. Okay, and then I like to just hang on to this with one hand as you pull this off so that that bracket doesn't drop on the ground, and that's what those bolts look like. Now on this rotor you've got these two screws right here that hold it on, and well, look, this one here is actually loose already. I didn't even do anything to try to take that out. Usually though, these are a pain, and a lot of times they'll strip. So this one's loose too. Wow. Yeah, they're usually not loose. Usually you have to pound them with this impact. The shaft of the screwdriver goes all the way through, so you can pound on that. And usually you have to tap those several times and to break them loose, and then even then they're still kind of a pain, but these happen to be loose. Rotor's loose too, huh? Sometimes these are stuck on there as well, but we'll just yank this off. Now before we put the new rotor on, I just like to hit the hub here with a wire brush and brush off any of this rust or debris that builds up, because really the idea is you want to make sure that that rotor sits flat and flush on this hub. If you're in a really rusty area, you may need to do a little bit more effort here. This isn't too bad. I'm just trying to knock off anything that's kind of sticking out. All right, now the new rotors are usually packed in some oil, so I just wipe this off with some brake clean. I already got the other side, but just make sure you wipe that down really well. And then we can put these screws back in. Now, in order to tighten these screws without stripping them out, I like to just position the screwdriver in there and give it a few taps with a sledgehammer, just to make sure it's snugly in there. And then because this has a hex shaft, I just put a little wrench on here and give that a little tap or two, just to make sure it's nice and snug. We'll do the same thing with this one here. Just when you fully seat that bit in there, it seems to hold on to it a little bit stronger. And that feels a lot better than it was. Obviously it was nice and loose when we took it off. Now before we put this caliper bracket back on, I'm going to pop off these old clips. Luckily our brake kit comes with new ones. So if you don't get new ones, you can really clean these up and reuse them if you need to, but we've got new ones so we don't have to worry about that. Just pry them off. And before I put the new clips on, I like to brush this surface or make sure that that's fully clean, so the new clips will sit flush on there. You could also use like a little drill with a wire wheel on there. It might make it go a little bit easier, but here's our new clips, and really they just line up like that and snap in place. That looks good. Same with this other one here. Just snap them in place and those are good to go. One more thing, we're also going to pull out and clean off the slide pins and put some new grease on them. The first one here, you see it's got this little rubber ring around the end. It's important when you do this, not only that you clean that really well, but it's important that you use the right kind of grease on here. And I'm going to use this Sil Glide. This is made by AGS, but this is branded for Napa, this particular tube. Doesn't take a whole lot, but if you use the wrong kind of grease, what will happen is that rubber bushing will swell, or it'll get really hot and these will get stuck, and that can bind up your brake pads. So I'm just kind of smushing this around on the clean part of my glove, and then we'll just put it right back in. And just make sure that you push it a few times and bleed any air out of the little boot there. Same thing with this other one. You see these are specific, that's why I do one at a time. This one does not have the little rubber ring or boot, that little circle that goes on the end here. So same thing, we'll just get a little bit of Sil Glide there and roll that around until it's all lubed up and covered. And just put it right back in. And you can kind of burp the air out of there as you push that a few times. Before I put this on, I'm also going to put just a little bit of this Sil Glide grease in these little channels of these clips, or these abutment clips here. And that really seems to help the pad so it doesn't bind up in there. And then this is ready to go back on. Just line that up, get these bolts started. Gonna get those snug for right now. Now the torque spec I found online for these larger bolts here is 100 foot-pounds. Here's the torque wrench I'm using. It's a 85062 by Gear Wrench. It goes all the way up to 100 foot-pounds, so we're gonna just set it to 100 and we'll get those locked in place. Okay, now we can put the new pads in, and what I'm doing is just putting a little thin layer of this same Sil Glide on the back of the pad. Really, it's on the back of the shim here. And I'm going to put a little bit at the ends where it makes contact with this little retainer clip or abutment clip, and that will help it slide in there and prevent it from binding up. We can get this started here. Kind of have to put it in at a little bit of an angle and then press it up against the rotor. Now, same thing on this inside pad. You'll notice this little squealer on the old pad. This wasn't quite touching the rotor yet, but that's designed to scratch on the rotor and make noise, and it was positioned with this in the up or on the upper edge of the pad, so we'll just match that on this one here on our new pad. You can see it comes with the same little metal noise maker or squealer, and we'll just put a little thin layer on the back with some at the ends and just get that lined up as well. Pops right into place. Our brake kit does not come with these replacement V-springs, so we're going to reuse these. When we put them back in, you'll see there's these little holes in the edge of the pad, and you just line those up and push them in. You may have to hold one hand on the brake pads themselves to prevent them from pushing out too far. Let's make sure that that goes in. There we go. Yeah, and they kind of want to spring out a little bit, and that's their job, is to push these out and prevent them from dragging on the rotor. So we can now grab our caliper, and I'm just going to unhook it from this little caliper hanger. And you can see our pistons are pushed back in. We'll see if that's far enough here real quick. If it's not, I've got the caliper compression tool. Yeah, it's actually not quite. Now, we almost got away with just using that screwdriver method of pushing these back in. It looks like we almost had it far enough in, but not quite. So I'm just grabbing an old brake pad, putting it in there. Now, you could use a C-clamp or anything to really push on this. Let me tilt it down so you can see. But I'm just using the old brake pad here with this little caliper pushback tool. And you can see that just pushes those caliper pistons the rest of the way back in. And you're good to go. Some cars, you know, that screwdriver method works the entire way. Sometimes it only pushes it most of the way in, but we didn't quite make it far enough. Okay, now we can put the caliper back on now that it's pushed all the way back in. That just kind of fits right over their new pads now. And then we can put our slide pin bolts back in place. Just get them started here first. Okay, and then we'll get these slide pin bolts torqued down to 52 foot-pounds. And you're done. Now, before you head on down the road, make sure you press on the brake pedal a few times, which will push the caliper pistons back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Now, when you do this, don't push the brake pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in the master cylinder. Just go ahead and push it down part way a few times until it feels firm. Once you do that, go ahead and pop the hood again and take a look at your master cylinder and make sure that you've got that fluid level topped off at the appropriate level where it's supposed to be. And go ahead and double check the torque specs in your manual as well. But what I found online was 100 foot-pounds for the larger caliper bolts and 52 foot-pounds for these caliper slide pin bolts. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. And go ahead and ding the little bell next to the subscribe button, which will give you some notifications or let you know when I post a new video. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.